So, in Australia, about 2/3 of all company directors and about 2/3 of all staff are actually using artificial intelligence. But many organisations do not have any policies around AI usage at all.
1/3 are actually approving it, right? So 2/3 are using it, and 1/3 is approving it, right? So there's that gap and opportunity.
There are a lot of people out there using AI without any kind of framework around them. That's what that's saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm Nicky Sloan. I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Dharawal people to bring you Community Matters, the podcast that explores issues in the community with people who are making a difference. And today I'm joined by my wonderful new friend, Jagdeep Singh. Jag has a really impressive career of over 30 years, working in really senior roles such as Chief Technology Officer and Head of Strategy, Transformation, Cyber and Innovation at big organisations like BlueScope and Wesfarmers. Thank you for joining us, Jag.
Thank you, Nicky, and thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Oh, it is our pleasure. I think that our listeners out there today, there's going to be a really broad understanding of AI. Some people are going to really know it and understand it. Some people don't. Could you give us a bit of a potted version of what AI is to start off with?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's not a new term. If we go into the realms of history, even before 1930s and 20s, people were talking about what an artificial intelligence could look like in terms of futuristic sci-fi movies and novels. So it's certainly not a new term. What has happened in the recent times is the ability of the technology to process large amount of information, to be able to do that in natural language, in English. Mm-hmm. If I can ask question in English and I can get answer in English, that has been a game changer. The ability of the technology to learn and apply that learning has been a shift in recent times. And also what has been a shift in recent times has been that ability to interpret pictures and videos and non-verbal cues. So I think that advancement in technology, and I would say then more an advancement for the last 30, 40 years in the digital space. So the information is digitized for the new technology to be able to consume it. The new technology is certainly not going into libraries and reading physical books, right? It's reading all things that has been digitized in the last 30, 40 years. So that ability to marry information and combine information and find some patterns or to find areas which as humans we might not have thought about before and point this out has been the game-changing space in the last few years. And that access, that everyone now has equal access. In theory, we all have phones these days, and they're all smartphones, and we Google up things, and now we can AI up things. And I think that has been transformative in the last 4 years, and hence everyone's talking about AI, Nicky.
Yeah, and I think, you spoke about AI being able to learn mm-hmm. and being able to interpret. And I think some people find that really confronting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That seems like a very human thing to be able to do.
I think, Nicky, that is the fine line in terms of the opportunity that this technology or the space, I should say, provides us. And wherein, as people, as organizations, as community, as society, where do we draw the line in managing those risks appropriately? I would say, depending on the lens we take, whether we take a glass half full or a glass half empty, the opportunities for the technologies to come and assist and enable and enhance our decision making, and identify some areas where we actually need help and and we actually need to be able to do more with limited resources, that potential is vast, and especially in the local community of Illawarra, if we bring it down to what does it mean for us, I would say that the potential of this space to enhance our productivity, our collaboration, our ability to do more with less is almost exponential. And yes, we need to do it with eyes wide open, so we control it, we manage it, we certainly protect the information that is very sensitive or personal, and we have proper guardrails, especially as as leaders and board managers around it. So I think it's a fine line that nobody actually has an answer for it per se, that this is the line you need to follow. It would be for organizations and collective bodies to figure out what is the right path or an appropriate path for us to take. Certainly, the view is to be able to do it in a phased manner. On a scale of 0 to 10, there would be people and organizations who are totally reluctant and they want to say, look, we absolutely want to live in our enclosed world and not touch this thing. And I don't think that this is realistic at all, but let's say that is the 0 scale. And then on the 10 is what we call as, purely digitally native organizations and cultures and people. I think that space is also questionable. For most of us, it is around figuring out on that scale of 1 to perhaps 9, where do I want to fit? And if I start at 2, then what is the right first step for me to be able to then move towards the 3 space? And some will say, I'm just happy at being 3.
But with 2/3 of people in our organisations using it, and only 1/3 of organisations having policies and things around there's a big gap. So for boards and executives, what do we need to be thinking about? How do we I don't want to say control the people who work with us, because it's not about that, but it's about giving them some appropriate boundaries perhaps. How do we do that? And what do we need to learn? Because it's very hard for me to put boundaries around something that I don't know about.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put the hard stop and say, no, you can't use it, because that's unrealistic.
Yeah, I think as you're just saying in the question itself, I think I would say for most organizations, the first step is around myth busting a little bit, and to not being scared of, the buzzwords. Is it AI? Is it Gen AI? Is it LLM? Is it agentic AI? What is data? What is data science? What is machine learning? I think these just the language can be very confusing, and so I think that myth busting has to happen. And if we can approach it in a way of proactively, we want to actually understand that in a language of business, and maybe in the language of our community and the language of the space that we live in and the organizations that we work in. I think that will go a long way in clarifying what this whole space actually means for us, and however we define that us. I think the second space is around, I use this word a lot, Nicky, the crown assets. So wherever we are, in whichever organization we work for, take for example in an aged care sense, you have a person who is a resident, and that person has data associated with it, and that data in a very non-human sense perhaps sits in a computer system somewhere. Now that is an information that is an asset for an aged care organizations, and similarly there would be other assets, and then I'm talking in terms of business assets, that we provide a service and that service is an asset, and we provide a unique service and that is an asset. So I think that space needs to be understood, because AI or any future technology does not change that landscape. We are all doing or working or a part of a particular community, a system, an organization, a mission, a purpose, and that does not necessarily change. So I think if we do the myth busting and we do understand what that asset and the technology associated around it is, how do we now use that in our space? And I think there are two angles. How do we use that internally within our organizations to improve our efficiency of our team members, and how we do our things, our efficiency collectively as an organization, on what do we work on and what do we not work on, and especially in a community space, whether it's grants or funding requirements, or collaboration with other organizations. Those are I think primary examples. I think. And we were talking about the scale before 0 to 10, right? So outside all this is still, a 2 or a 3, as in we are trying to become a little bit more efficient, and we're trying to see how do we use some of these things. In my eyes, a 5 or a 6 is when local organizations start to use it in a sense that our information is shared, and then we can collectively do an aged care organization in Illawarra, a health sector organization in Illawarra, a family and youth services organization in Illawarra, lots of small professional services in Illawarra. When we start to actually share that information, because as residents of this space, we use a doctor, we use a dentist, we use an accountant, we potentially have family and friends in aged care, or we might ourselves be there in few 10 years' time. There's hospital systems, there's the police and community systems, there's multicultural societies and organizations. We all have our information, and we're trying to enhance our things. When are we going to start to look at this as an Illawarra space, and how do we combine that information and use it for the enrichment of our local community and in that capability building and capacity building space? I think that is our 5 or 6 or 7 for us. And that is where now this new space of technology, we call it AI these days, but this is where I think that space has a vast potential for us to really shift the needle. And I think that's how the board should see that on a quantum. And it's very easy to say, yes, we want to do that. Let's do it at an Illawarra level. Let's be the 7. But to get to the 7, you got to be at this level 6 first, and then you got to be at the 5 first, and that got to be at the 4 first. So that's where the conversations at board levels need to start. And what are we playing in? Who are we? Can we myth bust this a little bit first to not be scared of it? And then where and how we empower our teams and our organizations. And then once we have good understanding, a control, and a comfort perhaps of this space, then we take the next step in a structured way. And if we have to shift and change, then, well, that's what this modern world allows us to do.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think everybody's ears pricked up at the idea of using AI for grants. Yeah. I think everyone went, yes, that would be great, because I think grants and acquittals and things are banes of our lives, but necessary evils. But really interesting your thoughts about how organisations could be using it to learn, and then how we could broaden out to learn. And I mean, how could we, for example, in an aged care organisation, how could we use our data to learn in a way that would improve life for our older residents who are living with us?
Yeah, if we work on, and I'm thinking on the fly here, Nicky, like if we work on an example, we were using an example of a resident, right? And that information exists in a static way in our
because we would know, for example, this person comes in, we would know their age, their date of birth, their health, needs, and history, perhaps.
Yeah, and the next advancement on that would be, if we can use those information to predict some future events in the life or residency of that time of that particular person or a group of person, right? You could shift back a few years to say, wouldn't it be great if we know that, Jagdeep Singh's going to land into that aged care in 10 years' time, right? You could move it forward to say, can we predict what life events in and around that aged care space, whether the person's going to fall or is going to sleep less or sleep more, or walk less or walk more, or be happy less or happy more, or is going to enjoy talking to people more or less, right? All those things are relevant settings of aged care, and I'm talking as a non-professional in an aged care sense, but that is an example of where the technologies can take us. And to the point previously made, that the technologies and the capabilities these days are self-learning, so they can adjust. The human in the loop conversation. So human will always be in the loop. The technology can make a prediction, and prediction may or may not be correct, and the human will need to then provide the information to say, you were right here, you were wrong there, you were slightly right here and slightly wrong there. And that's how the system self-adjusts. So when it needs to make a prediction for the next person, it is slightly correct than what it was previously, right? And it is slightly correct if we can then marry that up with an Illawarra information, the weather patterns of Illawarra, the crime rates in Illawarra, the education rates in Illawarra, the level of funding support, for example, or the level of socio-economic index in Illawarra. If we can marry up that information, that makes that information richer and richer. And that doesn't make it richer and richer just from an aged care situation perspective. It potentially makes it richer and richer for our hospital system, for our professional bodies. And so it's a loop. And if we can create that closed loop, in an imaginary sense, for an Illawarra, you will hear large language models for a legal profession, for an HR profession. Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we make a large language model for Illawarra, for example, right? So that's, I think, is the way we can evolve and share. And so for we were talking about the scale again. So if you come back to that, the scale is perhaps self-maintainable and self-sustainable at an organization level to a level of 3 or 4 in my eyes. You want to go beyond that. With that comes costs, and with that comes capacity to be able to do those things technologically. And instead of one organization saying, I'm going to do just my bit, I think conversation will need to be had in an Illawarra space at some point amongst the leaders and amongst the board members of various organizations to say, what do we have is common, which can be shared, which can be built as common, and which can be shared by all of us as common, and then what is unique for us. And I think, again, within that is a level of what information is ready to be shared and what information is so sensitive that cannot leave the boundaries of a particular organization. And those are the things that will have to be tackled in some way, shape or form.
That's really interesting. I reflect back on other conversations that we've had in this podcast. I reflect back to the fact that we are in this area now 1,025 aged care places short in residential care. We're 1,025 aged care places short in home care. If we had used your model, where we're using really holistic data from a whole range of services throughout life cycles, AI could have told us a long time ago, hey, you're going to run short.
Yeah, and it's a chain of events, right? So it's an end-to-end, right? From a time a person is born, or perhaps a person is an active citizen of this community, along that chain, what are the points of intervention, right? Is the point of intervention better housing, right? Is the point of intervention better community support for education? Is the point of intervention better multicultural and inclusive support for a family or a group, right? Is the point of intervention healthy lifestyle and eating, right? is the point of intervention early access to medical and oral health? Is the point of intervention a lot more education? So we're actually reducing the entry perhaps into an aged care system, and also perhaps reducing the time, right? And maybe what alternative, I mean, this is, that still is a very linear thinking in my mind, right? The future of these technologies is to actually point out avenues that we're not even thinking, the planes or the angles or the verticals that we're not even thinking right now, right? And that could be that could be movement of people, right? That could be early intervention by governments to build some capacity infrastructure and support in a particular space, because they can see Illawarra is going to start generating lots and lots of jobs and employment, and a lot more people are going to actually move into this space. And these are policy concerns for governments even now, perhaps, right? So I think it's that overarching end-to-end system that doesn't only come from, and now we were using an aged care example, that doesn't even just come from that angle itself, but it's about making the whole thing efficient and sustainable, and hopefully actually from a personal perspective, we worry about robots taking over. Now they're not. I don't think that we're really anywhere near that space yet. But this is actually then making the quality of life and then the capacity of a human to be working at the higher order things much more possible.
That's so interesting. It could make such difference. And one of the things we struggle with, I think, in community services all the time is to say, we've put an intervention in here and that prevented something happening over here. It's really hard to prove that.
Yeah.
We did this supported playgroup here and that young person didn't end up in jail in another 18 years' time. It's really hard to make those predictions, but it sounds like AI could
it could, because it would do it in in a non-biased way, right? And that's another topic, I think, in an AI space. You will hear a lot around bias of AI itself and topics around hallucination. But in theory, if we were to feed it information that has been checked and refined and it is an end-to-end information, then in theory the model itself can not only build those linkages, but can perhaps do it at the time of decision or before decision making. Because sometimes we also assume that if what we were to do here, things will improve there, and that's also not tested, and you don't know until you get there. So it can work both ways. It can actually say, well, what you're thinking might not be possible because XYZ will happen because of what I am predicting. At the same time, it should be able to provide some direct linkages and quantifiable information that an investment of X here has resulted in saving of Y at that point, right? So it is absolutely possible.
So maybe all of that data that all of our member organisations keep and have to report to government every year, maybe at some point that data may actually lead to better decisions from government around investment in community services.
Yeah, and be self-correcting, right?
Yes.
So that is, I think, the angle which is extremely important, because in theory you would say that some of this technology existed even 10, 15 years ago, right? And certainly large organizations have been using the language of machine learning that we can learn, but that data has been static, as in it can learn based on what we have done, right? Now we can learn based on what the history has said or what the books have said for us to thousands of years. It can marry that data up with the information locally, globally, and it has now the ability to propose more than one scenarios and as we play those scenarios out, the model itself matures based on its own learning. So that has been, I think, the game-changing space now.
Yes, it's a little bit mind blowing. I think it's a little bit mind blowing for me. It's going to be a little bit mind blowing for everybody. But if we bring it back to our customers or consumers or participants in the community services space, and their expectations of their family as well on us, because often there are big expectations on organisations, particularly in, say, disability or aged care or youth services. Is there going to be sort of a growing expectation that we are going to use AI to improve outcomes for our customer, participant, consumer? And how do we walk that fine line between risk as well and protecting data that we have, really been told we have a right, we have a responsibility to protect people's data. How do we marry those two together?
I think first part of your question, absolutely. We as community organizations are representatives of the community, broader community out there. And the broader community out there, we were using the data numbers in terms of boards and employees using. The broader community out there is embracing AI, right? Whether you admit it publicly or not is a different story. I think a good analogy is the Sydney water story. It was in the news a couple of days too. You know how the wastewater gets tested for the use of drugs or anything, and nobody will admit it, but that is the true indication of how much, fortunately or unfortunately, that drug usage is in the community. I think similarly in the technology and AI space now, the AI itself is telling us how much you are using it. We don't need to rely on a particular survey or a particular research study.
Right.
So because those models are known. Those models know Jagdeep is using it. Nicky is using it. So they are aggregating that data already. So upwards of 70 to 80%, depending on which study you believe, of our community is using it. So hence, the expectation is going to be on us as organizations to see how we are leveraging that, especially in the area we've talked about funding and grants before. I think there will be questions around efficiencies in terms of how and where our those hard-earned grant dollars are being invested. How much of that is perhaps cost of doing business versus actual deliverables to the community? That conversation, I think, is going to become quite challenging. I think certainly the expectations in certain parts of our community around the measurement of those outcomes, is that outcome actually has been beneficial for their relative or family member in a aged care space, and in what way have the technologies helped, supported, intervened, enhanced that experience. I think that is gonna be the expectation from the community. On the flip side, those expectations are now in terms of privacy and in terms of sensitive information, right? Certainly, I have been working with an organization in the domestic violence space. Now that information is ultra sensitive, right?
Yes.
So how do you protect that type of information and not allow that type of information to be married up by any Illawarra LLM with any other information so it becomes identifiable? Those are the concerns, and absolutely genuine concerns, that we need to think hard about. So it'll always be a case when again, I think if we go back to that analogy of 0 to 10, when we decide that we're going to participate at a level of 2 or a 3, therein are the sub-questions, right? Within that 3, what part of our organization information is shareable and open to all and we won't worry about it? What part is absolutely between and in the 4 walls of our organization and organizations only? And what small part perhaps is so sensitive that it is actually locked up in a physical sense that only few people can access it, right? And there are guardrails around it, and there's reporting around it, and there's clarity around it, how that information is used and when that information is used. So I think some of that is understood. There is no silver bullet around how different organizations are doing it, or a standard model. There's certainly some guidelines from organizations and governments, and from the governing, organizations such as AICD, for example, have certain guidelines. Gartner's has come up with some good frameworks around how AI can be governed in a not-for-profit sector space, for example. But it will be for each organization to absorb that and see how we make a fit for purpose one for us. Otherwise, the flip side is also true. Most organizations don't have $300,000 to build a team that now is governing AI, right? That would be futile. So I think that is a space that will mature. This governance space will mature, but certainly the awareness in terms of the risk versus opportunity is there. The conversations will have to be very specific to that organization. And I think once we've crossed that hurdle, the conversation will then lift to the next level as a society, as a community, as a location of what do we do collectively. The society in general is moving towards custom service, custom response, custom medication, custom everything. I think what is happening in the technological world and also in the micro environments that we go in, we're going to increasingly move towards that custom response, whether we are a community organization or a large enterprise. And I think this whole conversation assist us, enable us to go very sharp and very specific in terms of our individualized responses. So whether it's an aged care business, a healthcare business, a professional, an accountant, a dentist, a doctor, the ability to be able to then provide that custom response has become very achievable, very relevant, and that will be the demand of the society in years to come. Sorry, that's a long answer to your question, Nicky, but that's how I see it. Yeah.
I think that you touch on so many points, and I think that's why we've decided to come together to offer an opportunity to boards and executives in this region to really start exploring this together. We'll have a forum locally, which we're going to host. Could you perhaps just give us a bit of an overview of what you hope to discuss at that forum?
We would like to do some, clearing the fog or myth busting.
Yes.
And we would want to talk in a very open way and perhaps a lot more relatable way of using examples from Illawarra to say, what is data? What is data science? What is machine learning? What is AI? What is Gen AI? So I think I'd love to be able to do that in a very technological way, if I can say. I think the purist will be shocked at what I might say at that, but I want to be able to do that. So just to remove the fear and just to be able to say. And I think the second step would be to paint the picture of what is happening, some of the information that we've been just talking, and to say whether we like or not it is here, and how do we then grab this opportunity. And I think then the final piece would be, what are some examples of what good look like in terms of boards governing it, taking some actions? What does a board dashboard, for example, looks like? And if you as a board haven't started, then what does your first step looks like? If you as a board have actually started, then what does your next step looks like? So I think it should be, in the 1 hour that we would have, it would be around clearing some myths, some facts and information around what is happening on the ground, bring it back to Illawarra if I can, and then maybe just some pointers to what some good looks like. And we will have a panel of local leaders and board members who would come in and give their perspective of how they are viewing this, especially from an Illawarra angle again. And I think that would be a great first conversation, if I can say. And then from that point onwards, depending upon where the collective us are wanting to take us, there might be a few more sessions that we might plan.
Okay. This podcast, as you know, is called Community Matters. Could you tell me about someone in the community that matters to you?
Yeah, I've been, it's probably a person and a community organisation. I might answer like that, Nicky. For the last 18 months, I've been having good conversations with MCCI and Chris Lacey from MCCI, and I've been fascinated by the journey of that organisation and how the local community and various, I would say, various parts of our community came together to build that umbrella organisation, and it's been a fascinating journey. And Chris Lacey's come up with a beautiful book recently, and that was a great reading. And the way that organization's grown and the way that organization's supporting across the breadth and depth of our society, from youth and family services to aged care, and then to be that representative to the government and federal and semi-governments institutions. So I think that's been a fascinating learning for me in the last 18 months or so. And Chris Lacey, I'll pick him up in terms of amazing leaders taking that organisation on such a exponential growth journey, and a lot more greater heights to come. So that would be my nomination.
Oh, well, yes, we would resoundingly support your nomination. Chris is a great friend of this, a great friend and a great friend of this organisation, and MCCI has been a long-term member of Community Industry Group and really highly valued. Well, thank you so much, Jag. I think after this conversation, I'm feeling equal parts anxious and confident, I think would be the way. I know earlier you mentioned around some AICD and some Gardner resources, and we'll certainly have those in the show notes. But I know that you're going to have a lot more resources for us at that forum.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will share all that with the wider audience.
So for those of you who are watching after, here's your opportunity for some time travel. We will actually have filmed the event. We might use some AI, Jagdeep.
Absolutely, to summarise and provide some key themes, and that'll be good, effective use of technology.
Absolutely, and you will find the link in our show notes. Thank you all for tuning in to Community Matters, the podcast that explores community issues with people who are making a difference. Please like us, share us, leave us a review, and tune in next time for more stories from the community.